Hey there, this is the Comic Coach, here today with some tips, tricks, and advice to get you started on your comic journey. Today's video is going to be a general overview of the process from start to finish, from initial idea to a finished comic that you can show to friends or post anywhere you want. So, the first step with anything is the idea. What is your comic? What are you planning? And I'm sure most people tuning into this might already have an idea of what they want to make. I think it's very good to lay out what exactly you're looking for in a project and nailing down sort of the specifics of how that final product is going to look now in the idea. So, what do I mean by that? I mean, like, story length. Is it going to be a short story, or with what manga calls a one-shot, something self-contained, short, that is just a standalone work? Are you wanting something more long-running? That could be a book, several books, a long web comic. Figuring out how long the idea is gonna go is a really good idea to nail down early so that you can set expectations and, plan a schedule around having regular work done on that comic. And I would personally recommend for beginner creators to start with something small, a one-shot or a short story. One-shots are typically around 20 to 40 pages, but it can be shorter if you want as just a test. And why is that? Well, speaking personally, I did not start with a short comic. I decided to start with some long comic series that's gonna run for years and years and years, and I ended up stopping work on the series about a couple months into this supposedly 10-year project. It was misguided of me to start that way, because at the time I'd only been trying for about a year, and I was definitely nowhere near the art level of sustaining a comic for that long. Most long-running comics or manga, like, One Piece is a big example here, but also stories like Invincible, those get to be that long because the creators involved have a level of skill in the work, and most importantly, are being paid to make those comics. Not saying that no one can make a long-running work out of passion, but you really need to have a lot of passion and drive to be able to commit to a comic for that long and be able to see it all the way through. You as an artist are going to change over time. What you want to make now might not be the same thing that you want to make next year or a couple of years down the line. Maybe it is, but I feel for a lot of people, the kinds of stories we want to tell mature along both with us as people, but also with us as creatives. personally, when I started, I wanted to make sci-fi stories, and maybe I still have one or two I'd like to make down the line, but I have definitely shifted into modern day stories or fantasy as well, with not as much emphasis on technology as I once thought that I would be interested in. And so doing one-shots, these short works, allow you to experiment way more and find what you really do want to make, what you're personally interested in. And that is going to improve you. And each project can have a wildly different idea for what it's going for, different tone, different style. And if, after a couple one-shots, you're still really wanting this longer series to be made, it's your big passion project, well, you are way more ready for it now than you were originally. And you are able to bring it to fruition and not get bogged down in your art not being able to match your writing, or you want to make something that's super long running, but you only have a handful of ideas and they don't really cohere into a structured narrative. Another thing to figure out in the idea is genre. What genre or genres are you wanting this work to be? And that's for a few reasons. It's to better know your audience who is going to be tuning in to read this comic, because different audiences have different expectations for what a work is going to be, what it's going to look like. And that's not to say that it's a bad thing if your work doesn't fit the general mold that stories typically are in that genre, but it's to be more intentional with the choices that you're making, both in the work and outside of it, how you're presenting it. What are people generally expecting, and then how can you use that to turn the story on its head and, bring something new to the table, which is really going to help your story stand out. I would also say for comics, knowing where you're going to post the comic should be figured out here in the idea phase, because if you're posting to social media or a comic platform like Webtoon, which is where I post my comics, they have different audiences and different genres do better on those different places. So for example, Webtoon is really the spot for romance comics, of all kinds, either slice of life or, romantasy or very dramatic, serious comics. But romance in general does very, very well on Webtoon, and that means that if you're doing something that is more action heavy, that doesn't feature romance, or if you're doing horror or thriller, most of the time, Webtoon alone is not going to be a good fit for your story, and you'll need to market it elsewhere, like on TikTok or Instagram or Twitter. You're going to need to really step up your marketing and what you're doing with the comic outside of just making chapters, to make sure that it's going to do well on Webtoon, which is a little unfortunate. No one wants to be, a marketing agent or, something like that. They just want to make their comic. But these are the kind of things that you have to consider early on. Because if you just want to make romance and post on a webtoon, for example, you're gonna have a much easier time because the audience there needs less convincing to read the comic. They're already looking for romance. They see a new romance, they're gonna read it. Where if it's horror or, something spookier like that, you're gonna need to give a reason, show them reasons why they should stick around or, why they should go out of their comfort zone to read your comic. And this comes back around to knowing your audience, knowing who you're talking to, knowing where you're saying it. Because these choices that you're making now are gonna make the releasing of the comic so much easier, and it's just going to make your life so much nicer and easier. Figuring out all this now, getting the headache done before you've made a whole comic and are a bit bummed out why no one's reading it. You gotta know who you're saying this to, where you're saying it. And now let's get into the why you're saying it, the actual writing of the comic. And every writer kind of has their own process here in how much pre-production, how much scripting, how much outlining, how much design work is done before you actually get to the comic page. Some people are really heavy on outlines, want a super detailed script, everything figured out there, so that making the comic is just following your blueprint that you wrote, just following it to the letter. Everything's already figured out. But there are other people, like me personally, that don't care for scripts. Whenever I write a script for a comic, I always end up changing it, just completely rewriting everything or pushing scenes around, making all the time that I spent on the script a bit of a waste. It never feels as fresh as an idea, just taking the script into trying it, as it does just storyboarding the pages out and finding the story along the way. Now, I do like to have a very brief outline, and I think both pantsers, which is what I am, writing by the seat of my pants, and plotters, people who really like to outline scripts and stuff like that, both parties like to have outlines, they like to know where they're going. It just depends on how filled out that outline is. Mine is usually just 4 or 5 bullet points, and I refer to these bullet points as plot anchors, because these anchors are the pivotal moments of the work, and this is what everything in between is building to. And so I always for all of my stories, define the first scene, the first thing the audience is going to see, the last thing the audience is going to see, and 2 or 3 big moments in the middle. If either this is a downturn midpoint where, all is lost, or a big climactic finale moment, a culmination of this character's arc, stuff like this. I get that figured out. Right after the idea, I just open a Google Doc and I write down the genre of the work, how long I want it to be, if it's going to be black and white, color, if I'm going a couple tropes or similar stories. A lot of people do the similar stories to pitch to a company or a platform. That is not why I do it. I do it so that I can write down my initial references, so that I can go and find reference material later, for, the pages, for the design, stuff like that. Just another thing of knowing your audience. And then after I figure out all that, then I write down these plot anchors. For instance, the comic that I am making here, called Part-Time at the Yaoi Cafe, currently available on Webtoon Canvas. I knew this first episode needed the meet cute of the protagonist and his love interest, and it also needed to explain why these characters are going to come together, as well as explain sort of what the location is, what a yaoi cafe is. And that got stretched out over the first 3 episodes, where the first episode covers the protagonist, his motivations, and the meet cute. Then the second episode is explaining the location, and then we sort of introduce a bit more of the side cast. And episode 3 is the inciting incident. This is what is going to kick off the rest of the story. It's all very quick and it's all building on itself. And that's what you really want in a comic at the start, is a real forward momentum. And so that is what having a plot anchor can do for your narrative or your outlining, is really clear up the story and push it forward. When I wrote this, the inciting incident was really this plot anchor here. The meet cute is the protagonist, Tori, bumping into the love interest, River, as River is handing out these flyers for the Yaoi Cafe. And then River just sort of disappears, after. It's a little mysterious. And we're really introducing multiple things at once, and connecting them together. And that was really clear in my mind, as I wanted this sort of meet cute bump, and that is going to give our protagonist just enough information to move forward. So he has this flyer. It's like, okay, so what is this? How do I get in there? And this comes into conflict with this character. He's very shy. He's introverted. And, going to something called like a yaoi cafe is, or can be, uncomfortable or embarrassing for some people. So he goes in a disguise. And, like that, that sort of brings a bit of comedy, because, like, is the disguise good? Not really. He gets seen out immediately, but also his disguise is part of the reason that he gets hired at the Yaoi Cafe, because he's already shown sort of a commitment to theatricality, and a lot of this stuff gets more fleshed out later, but it's all introduced here in these succinct images and moments that these the plot anchors of the narrative provide. So now that we have the outline covered, we're going to go on to the next step, which is either scripting if you're more of a plotter, or thumbnailing if you're more of a pantser and just want to get right to the pages. I guess this would also depend on if you are a writer solely or an artist solely. If you're working in a team with other people. This is where things sort of start to diverge, because for most things, I am the sole creator. I do writing and I do the art. But not everyone is able to draw, not everyone is able to write. And so, gotta work in teams. For both scripts and thumbnails, their function is a blueprint. They are not the final work in any way, but they need to be readable. They need to be clear to everyone involved what is actually being said. If things are not clear here, then there's going to be information lost in the final product, or there's going to be a communication breakdown, and you definitely do not want that to happen. So just make sure that, if you are working with other people, that they understand either your scripts or your thumbnails. They're readable, they're clear to everyone. I have a template for both scripts that I write and thumbnails that I draw for both webtoon and page format. The template for scripts is up on screen right now. This is part of the part-time at the Yaoi Cafe script. As for the first 12 episodes, I was working with a co-artist. This is what the script looks like here. And the templates I'm showing you here, but I will also have them downloadable in the description if you want to use them. They are quite large files, as I like to be able to go in and draw with some detail on panels that I have a clear idea for, and for the other ones, I just sort of gloss over them. In my other comic, Beeswax, that I have done completely by myself, here is a side-by-side of the thumbnail for a page and its finished version, and sometimes the finished version and the thumbnail are similar, but there are some that are very different, because even in thumbnails, which are a much closer version of the work to the finished product, compared to the script, you have a visual here. Sometimes it just does not come together like you think it is going to, and you've still got to make some big creative decisions when refining this work in the storyboard. And so, let's go on to that. You have either your script and you've thumbnailed out the rough pages, and you know sort of what you're going for. You can start refining the storyboards. This is where, for me, probably the most work goes in, because you're really trying to make sure that your anatomy is good, your perspective is good, the sketches are clear, so that you can just go over these with your line art and your colors, if you're doing colors, or even if you're doing a line art. Some people paint their comics, and those are gorgeous basically every time. This step, I usually do process of storyboards for each panel, really trying to build on each one, refine down the details, refine the ideas. Some only take one if it's a simple panel of maybe just like a face or something, but especially if it has a background, that panel will get several passes to make sure that the page is exactly where I want it to be. And in reference to the thumbnails, those are typically very, very small. And so when you bring those thumbnails over to the page the comic will actually be made on, it is going to be only a fraction of the size, and so you have to enlarge it to fit the page, and that is going to distort the thumbnail. It is going to enlarge a lot of details that were there. They're going to be very prominent. There's going to be a lot of space that you have to fill, and so that's what the storyboard process is. It is taking several passes on the page to refine the detail, to clarify your intent, and just make sure it looks the best it can be, so that you don't get to the lettering or the coloring at the very end of the process and realize that you're missing some big things, that you have to scrap panels, waste a lot of finished work. So yeah, really just make sure everything's figured out here. If you do not script, if you just go into thumbnailing or into storyboarding your pages, this is where you should rough out any dialogue that is going to be on the page. Personally, I draw the thumbnail and then write the dialogue on top of the thumbnail, so that it is reflecting what the art feels. It's so that they feed into each other better, and dialogue can be very easily changed later on in the process. So this does not have to be the final dialogue, but you want something down so that you can plan out your speech balloons in your thumbnails and in your storyboards. Especially, you need to know where those speech bubbles are going, where that dialogue is going to be, where the narration is going to be, because that is going to inform your composition. That is going to inform how the reader reads your comic, and that is also going to inform where to draw and where not. You don't want to put something important in the panel and then realize actually it's much better for the dialogue to go here, and now you're stuck. So yeah, figuring this out here, figuring out bubble placement, figuring out the general shape and size of the dialogue itself, so that you can make a comfortable sized balloon for the text. That's all going to be a major help here, and again, will prevent headaches in the future. So the next stage after storyboards is the line art. This is the stage I struggle with the most. It's a bit hard for me personally because I struggle with seeing it as more than just outlining the features of the characters. Line art can be very dynamic and exciting. You can convey a lot of detail with it, especially in things like hair. It's where you can add the most texture brushes that I'm using in Clip Studio Paint. And recent work on my personal series, Beeswax, I think is coming out quite well. There's a lot of different things you can aim for with line art. And that depends on the future stages of the comic. So for instance, if you're doing a color comic, more often than not, you're going to want closed line art, especially for your characters, which means that when you color and add the flats of the characters, and we'll get to that in a moment, basically when you're doing that, it is easy to just take the fill tool, draw around your character, and it's automatically filled in. You don't need to really worry about it. If you're doing black and white comics, then that allows your line art to be a bit more expressive. You don't have to fill in every contour of a face. You can leave some gaps between the lines because you're really focusing on that line work. That is what your art will be. None of this is to say you can't leave gaps in your line art by doing a color and do a color comic, but it means that you will need to go through and manually fill some stuff in. In digital art, the brush that you're using really determines the impact of what you're wanting, especially in line art. Clip Studio Paint, this is not sponsored by the way, Clip Studio Paint has a lot of preset brushes that come with it, as will any art program. For Clip Studio, two main ones that a lot of people use for their line art are the G Pen and the real G Pen. The main difference between these two is the G Pen is a circle brush, so you're gonna get a consistent look to your lines, where the real G Pen has a texture to the brush, and that is going to make a lot of rougher lines. So you're gonna need to make some choices, and that's gonna be dependent on the kind of story you're telling, as well as what your inspirations are or your visual references. I would say from my personal experience reading and looking through comics, rougher line art tends to be more associated with action or more dramatic stories, where smoother line art is typically used for slice of life or romance comics. And that is definitely not a requirement or anything like that, just a general trend that I've seen. But there are definitely things that contradict that, so it is not a rule, just a general thing I've seen. I would definitely recommend, if this is a new comic for you, to try out several different line art pens one helpful trick that might save some time is to do your line art in a vector layer. Vector layer means that each individual stroke of the brush is saved individually. You can manipulate them. Where a normal layer known as a raster layer, that is just you draw and then you can manipulate it using the transform or the liquify tools, but these are just pixels. You have to erase those the same way you have to erase pencil on paper. Where a vector, the lines almost sit on top of the paper, like individual objects that you can manipulate, you can mess with. And one of the ways that you can mess with these is by changing the brush tip in the vector layer settings. This, for me, is in the bottom left of the program, but it can be wherever you put your subtool tab. For Clip Studio Paint, there's plenty of different brushes that you can download from the Clip Studio Asset Store. These have a ton of different kinds of brushes, from patterns to effects, stuff like that. Personally, I would recommend that you get familiar with what Clip Studio offers by default. Plenty of great stuff in there, but there is a ton of stuff on there, some great stuff and it's all made by creators, and most of it is free. Some of it is behind a paywall of either Clippy or Gold. You can earn Clippy, but you generally have to buy Gold. It's microtransaction stuff, and I've never really bothered with it. I've been able to find everything I need for free. Now we move on to coloring, which is one of my favorite parts. And there's a lot of variety to be had here if you're wanting color in your comic. I've seen a few people, again, paint the comic, so maybe you don't even need line art. It'll just be all color. But that is very high level. Personally would not recommend it. Unless you've already got some illustration or painting experience already. And there is a lot of variation to be had with the coloring, maybe even more so than line art, probably much more so. Do you want a very limited palette? Maybe just one or two colors. Do you want it to look like an anime screenshot? Do you want it to be painted? Do you want it to be cell shaded? Very simple shading and lighting on the characters. What are you looking for? And that really is gonna be up to you. There are some options with brushes in Clip Studio to, again, try out, mess around. There's a lot of painting brushes, watercolor brushes, gouache brushes, all built in. So definitely try them out. See what feels right. See what look you want. Again, try a couple different styles on a panel or two to really nail down the style. This can be something that you do before starting the pages, but personally, I just like to get right into the pages as fast as possible and use the early stuff to really experiment and refine the style down. Because you're gonna learn quite quickly what is and is not working, and you can just go back and edit things if needed since you're so early in. But that way, you're not trying a lot of sketches or illustrations and stuff like that that is evocative of the final product, but is not the final product itself. It's good to do a test page or two to really figure out what you're going for. And you don't have to use these pages in the final product either. Usually I do. I try to find a way to use them. For instance, for beeswax, when I rebooted it, and that is a whole other story I can talk about another time. I did some test pages here and quite liked how they came out. And definitely took some notes on the style and improved on it in the final work that you can also read on Webtoon Canvas for free. And those pages, I'm not going to reuse them, but I am going to add a scene soon that is borrowing a few panels or some ideas for the page and working it into the existing, the new story that currently exists. I'm not sure if a whole breakdown on how color theory works would be beneficial to the video, but I will say that the best thing to do in comics is to be clear. You know, these panels, they can be pretty small. There can be a lot of them on the page, and they all build into each other. They are all in communication together. So what I do if I am a bit stumped on the colors for a panel, or, you know, if I've put something down and it does not feel right, I will make a new layer above all others, fill it with gray, any gray, and set that layer mode to color. Layer modes just mean that whatever's on the layer will act differently. Maybe it'll mix with the ones below, do different glows, stuff like that. I won't get too into it right now, but color means that it is going to turn the entire comic grayscale, you know, black and white. And you're gonna see the values of the comic, and so you are gonna see what colors are muddy, things that aren't popping out of the background. It removes sort of the illusion that color gives of having this depth to it, and really shows what is falling flat, what is not, what is easily readable and a bit more high contrast, and what is not. And definitely take advantage of this, because it is going to save you a lot of headache. While that color mode is on, I usually go to the layers that I want to edit and change them with the grayscale on, so that I can make sure the contrast is properly corrected. Then final step of the comic process is lettering, both dialogue bubbles and sound effects. Clip Studio's got a few tools for these. There's dialogue bubbles that keep text in the bubble centered, so that you can either draw one or make a preset shape, and then just put the text in, and it's going to be properly centered. It is not going to be, off to the side or improperly placed. And that way you don't really have to worry about that, because it's the little things that are going to impact the quality of the comic, and an improperly placed dialogue text is one of those little things. Sound effects are a whole different beast. You can use fonts for them. You can draw them by hand. I tend to do a mix, whatever feels right for the scene. More often than not, if I do use a font, it'll be to place the characters, and then I draw on top, so that there is a bit more of a personal touch to it. The main thing with sound effects lettering is you want the effects that you include to really add to the scene. Both what the sound effect is saying, like a big boom for an explosion. You could consider a different sound. Maybe like a wah or a phew. Like try to make sounds with your mouth and think of something more specific, so that it'll bring the reader in. It'll pique their interest a bit more than a standard boom sound effect. And you want to make sure that the lettering you add adds to the visuals of the scene. They're included in the composition. This would be something that you would also want to thumbnail or storyboard out, so that they're not, placed on top afterwards and they look awkward. They're a natural part of the art, and they should be treated with that kind of respect built into the composition, complementing the flow of the reading. And after you've done that, you have a completed comic, or at least a page. To do a full one, you're gonna have to keep repeating the drawing part of the process over and over until you finally get to that last page, and then you're gonna hit the upload button wherever you want to post the comic. Go there, and then it's all done. There's other things to do outside of that, like, making any future chapters if it's part of a series. Social media marketing, stuff like that. Launching a Kickstarter if you're interested in printing a comic. But outside of that, you're done. I really hope that you learned something or got the courage to start something new. Comics can be daunting, but there's a lot of creators. They're very friendly, so you can easily find community with other artists and start your own journey. If you'd like to see more from me, I have a Patreon where $5 a month you will see any videos I make early, as well as any comic pages. You can read both of my series, Part-Time at the Yaoi Cafe and Beeswax, on webtoons. below, along with that storyboard template for both webtoons and page format. I hope you guys have had a great day or night wherever you are, a great sleep if you put this on before bed, a great work session if you put this on while working on your comic or working on something else. That is where I listen to my ASMR channels that I love. And I hope you guys